Hey folks, we're continuing with our reading of the crime and detection story, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We're going to be reading chapter 6, The Incident of Dr. Lanyon. If you recall, Dr. Lanyon is one of the best friends of Jekyll and Utterson. They all went to high school together and college together. So far, what we've got is a crime and detection story, a Victorian crime and detection story in which you as a reader should be putting together evidence and trying to figure out what is going on. That's the whole purpose of the sort of mystery genre, right? So we've gathered some evidence to this point. There's a stumpy little man who trampled a girl and then was sort of blackmailed into paying money to her family, paid with a check signed by Dr. Jekyll. That's weird. The stumpy little man has a key to Dr. Jekyll's laboratory but never comes into the house. The stumpy little man is in Jekyll's will and will get all of Jekyll's money and possessions if Jekyll dies. Also will get all of Jekyll's money and possessions if Jekyll disappears for 3 months. The stumpy little man named Mr. Hyde seems deformed even though he has no nameable malformation. He's a young man, 20-ish, short, troglodytic, ape-like. Something about him that goes strongly against the grain. Dr. Jekyll is tall and large, 50-something, pleasant, cheerful, intelligent. So we get a description of him. And then Mr. Hyde commits a murder. He kills this guy named Carew, beats him to death with a cane that used to be owned by Utterson. Carew is one of Utterson's clients and has a letter to him. They go to Hyde's apartment and find the other half of the cane and half of a checkbook and lots of stuff, but they can't get any wanted posters out because nobody knows Hyde. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any family. He's never been photographed. So they can't really get anybody who's able to describe him effectively. And then we go to Jekyll's house, and Utterson sort of confronts him about Hyde, and Jekyll gives him a letter from Hyde saying Hyde's going away and never coming back, and that he has a sure escape that nobody will be able to find. And Jekyll tells Utterson that the letter was handed in, but Poole says no letters were given that day, only the mail came. So clearly Jekyll's lying about that, and then Mr. Guest is able to identify Mr. Hyde, and Jekyll's handwriting is the same, which means that Hyde didn't write it, Jekyll did. And he wrote it, as a forgery. So things have gotten complicated, and that's where we left off. And so we're slowly adding bits and pieces of evidence as the story goes on. Anyway, now we're going to get Chapter 6, The Incident of Dr. Lanyon. Time ran on. Thousands of pounds were offered in reward for the death of Sir Danvers was resented as a public injury. But Mr. Hyde had disappeared out of the ken. Ken is an old word for knowledge. It's a Scottish word. If you watch some Scottish productions or anything set in Scotland, they'll be like, I dinna ken what you're saying, which means I don't know, I don't understand. So it has passed out of the understanding of the police. This is actually the root word of the term kenning that we did back in Anglo-Saxon times. Anyway, had disappeared out of the ken of the police as though he had never existed. Much of his past was unearthed, indeed, and all disreputable. Tales came out of the man's cruelty, at once so callous and violent, of his vile life, of his strange associates, of the hatred that seemed to have surrounded his career, but of his present whereabouts, not a whisper. From the time he had left the house in Soho on the morning of the murder, he was simply blotted out. And gradually, as time drew on, Mr. Utterson began to recover from the hotness of his alarm and to grow more quiet with himself. The death of Sir Danvers was, to his way of thinking, more than paid for by the disappearance of Mr. Hyde. Now that the evil influence had been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. He came out of his seclusion, renewed relations with his friends, became once more their familiar guest and entertainer, and whilst he always had been known for charities, he was now no less distinguished for religion. So this is interesting. Jekyll, after Hyde's disappearance, has become much more cheerful and social and religious. He's sort of picked up religion. He was busy. He was much in the open air. He did good. His face seemed to open and brighten, as if with the inward consciousness of service, and for more than 2 months the doctor was at peace. So, for at least 2 months after the death of Sir Danvers, and Jekyll seems to have changed. Now, however, we get a date, and whenever you get a date in a mystery, you probably want to write it down because the author wouldn't be giving you dates if the dates didn't matter. On the 8th of January, Utterson had dined at the doctor's with a small party. Lanyon had been there, and the face of the host had looked from one to the other as in the old days when the trio were inseparable friends. On the 12th, and again on the 14th, the door was shut against the lawyer. So, clearly something happens between the 8th and the 12th because on the 8th, Utterson goes to a party at Jekyll's, and Lanyon's there too. On the 12th, he's not allowed into the house, nor on the 14th. So like a week. The door was shut against the lawyer. The doctor was The doctor was confined to the house, Poole said, and saw no one. On the 15th, he tried again, and was again refused, and having now been used for the last 2 months to see his friend almost daily, he found this return of solitude to weigh upon his spirits. The 5th night he had in guest to dine with him, and the 6th he betook himself to Dr. Lanyon's. There at least he was not denied admittance, but when he came in he was shocked at the change which had taken place in the doctor's appearance. He had his death warrant written legibly on his face. The rosy man had grown pale. He had his death warrant written legibly on his face is obviously a metaphor. But it looks like Lanyon's dying. I think that's clearly what he's saying here. The rosy man had grown pale. His flesh had fallen away, so he'd lost weight. He was visibly balder and older. He'd lost hair. He'd looked aged. And yet it was not so much these tokens of a swift physical decay that arrested the lawyer's notice, as a look in the eye and a quality of manner that seemed to testify to some deep-seated terror of the mind. It was unlikely that the doctor should fear death, and yet that was what Utterson was tempted to suspect. Yes, he thought, he is a doctor. He must know his own state, and that his days are counted, and the knowledge is more than he can bear. And yet, when Utterson remarked on his ill looks, it was with an air of great firmness that Lanyon declared himself a doomed man. So, Dr. Lanyon, who had always been a cheerful, healthy, red-faced, rosy fellow, is now clearly dying. He's lost weight, he's lost hair, he looks sick, and there's a look in his eye and a quality in his manner that testifies to some deep-seated terror of the mind. Something's terrified him mentally. We don't really know what it was. Utterson figures that he has found out that he has a mortal illness and that the knowledge is too much for him to bear. He's a doctor, so he probably knows he has cancer or something, and it's taking its toll on him. But anyway, Lanyon is convinced he's going to die. I have had a shock, he said, and I shall never recover. It is a question of weeks. Well, life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away. Jekyll is ill, too, observed Utterson. Have you seen him? But Lanyon's face changed, and he held up a trembling hand. I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll, he said in a loud, unsteady voice. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you will spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead, said Mr. Utterson, and then after a considerable pause, Can't I do anything? He inquired. We are 3 very old friends, Lanyon. We shall not live to make others. Nothing can be done, returned Lanyon. Ask himself. He will not see me, said the lawyer. I am not surprised at that, was the reply. Some day, Utterson, after I am dead, you may perhaps come to learn the right and wrong of this. I cannot tell you. And in the meantime, if you can sit and talk with me of other things, for God's sake stay and do so. But if you cannot keep clear of this accursed topic, then in God's name go, for I cannot bear it. So something between Utterson or Lanyon and Jekyll has taken place, and it's kind of a big deal. As soon as he got home, Utterson sat down and wrote to Jekyll, complaining of his exclusion from the house, and asking the cause of this unhappy break with Lanyon, and the next day brought him a long answer, often very pathetically worded, and sometimes darkly mysterious in drift. The quarrel with Lanyon was incurable. I do not blame our old friend, Jekyll wrote, but I share his view that we must never meet. I mean from henceforth to lead a life of extreme seclusion. You must not be surprised, nor must you doubt my friendship, if my door is often shut even to you. You must suffer me to go my own dark way. I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. If I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. I could not think that this earth contained a place of suffering and terror so unmanning. And you can do but one thing, Utterson. to lighten this destiny, and that is to respect my silence. It's a weird letter. Utterson was amazed. The dark influence of Hyde had been withdrawn. The doctor had returned to his old tasks and amities. A week ago, the prospect had smiled with every promise of a cheerful and an honored age. And now, in a moment, friendship and peace of mind and the whole tenor of his life were wrecked. So great and unprepared a change pointed to madness. But in view of Lanyon's manner and words, there must lie for it some deeper ground. A week afterwards, Dr. Lanyon took to his bed, and in something less than a fortnight, he was dead. So 3 weeks later, Lanyon dies. The night after the funeral, at which he had been sadly affected, Utterson locked the door of his business room, and sitting there by the light of a melancholy candle, drew out and set before him an envelope, addressed by the hand and sealed with the seal of his dead friend. So there's a letter that was sent to him by Lanyon. And this is what it says. Private, for the hands of G.J. Utterson alone, and in case of his predecease to be destroyed unread. So it was emphatically superscribed, and the lawyer dreaded to behold the contents. I have buried one friend today, he thought. What if this should cost me another? And then he condemned the fear as disloyalty, and he broke the seal. Within there was another enclosure, likewise sealed, and marked upon the cover as, "Do not be opened." Not to be opened until the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Utterson could not trust his eyes. Yes, it was disappearance here again, as in the mad will which he had long ago restored to its author. Here again were the idea of disappearance and the name of Henry Jekyll bracketed. But in the will, that idea had sprung from the sinister suggestion of the man Hyde. It was set there with a purpose all too plain and horrible. Written by the hand of Lanyon, what should it mean? So he opens the envelope that's like, "Do not open until I am dead," right? And inside, there's another envelope, and it's like, "Do not open until Jekyll's dead." So it's sort of anticlimactic. He's like, "Oh, good, I'm going to find the answer to all of this," and we're all excited as readers, and then he opens it, and we're like, but that's how this mystery is going. However, it says, not until Jekyll's dead or disappeared. It's weird that Lanyon would write about Jekyll disappearing, because, what? So something's going on here. Let's see, where was it? Written by the hand of Lanyon, what should it mean? A great curiosity came on the trustee to disregard the prohibition and dive at once to the bottom of these mysteries. So he's like, maybe I could just open this second letter? Lanyon's dead. He'd never know. But professional honor and faith to his dead friend were stringent obligations, and the packet slept in the inmost corner of his private safe. So instead, that's personification. Packets don't sleep. But instead of opening it, he does what he's been instructed to do. He's a lawyer. He follows rules and laws, and Lanyon asked him not to open it, and so he sticks it in the back corner of his safe. It is one thing to mortify curiosity, another to conquer it, and it may be doubted if, from that day forth, Utterson desired the society of his surviving friend with the same eagerness. He thought of him kindly, but his thoughts were disquieted and fearful. He went to call indeed, but he was perhaps relieved to be denied admittance. Perhaps in his heart he preferred to speak with Poole upon the doorstep and surrounded by the air and sounds of the open city, rather than to be admitted into that house of voluntary bondage, meaning Jekyll has locked himself up in his house and he never leaves, and he never sees anybody, and he won't see Utterson. And to sit and speak with its inscrutable recluse. Poole had, indeed, no very pleasant news to communicate. The doctor, it appeared, now more than ever, confined himself to the cabinet over the laboratory, where he would sometimes even sleep. He was out of spirits. He had grown very silent. He did not read. It seemed as if he had something on his mind. Utterson became so used to the unvarying character of these reports that he fell off little by little in the frequency of his visits. Right, that's the end of the incident of Dr. Lanyon. Lanyon dies rather suddenly, claiming that he has had a shock. I believe that is his wording. And he'll never recover. So what's going on there? What's going on with Jekyll? Why has he shut himself up? Why isn't he seeing anybody? This is interesting and complicated. That brings us to the next chapter, the incident at the window.